That story started out so right. The care Job received from his friends was good. You may recall the ancient story. Job had lost everything, suffered profoundly, and yet he had friends who still accompanied him through it all. Soon as Job's friends heard of his suffering, they journeyed. They made the way to be with him, to console and to comfort Job. Even as they neared, they could see that the suffering had altered his appearance. They wept and they shouted, they tore their clothes, and as they neared Job, they sat with him in sackcloth and ashes. For 7 days and 7 nights, they didn't say a word, but they were there. Their care could be a crash course for us in chaplaincy, a model for being with someone when the suffering is intense and does not make sense. Or they might just simply be good examples of being a friend through the hardest parts of life. What they show us in this first little section in Job 2 is what loving accompaniment can look like. Now, of course, we know the story doesn't end at the end of Job chapter 2. The story dramatically changed at the very moment that Job broke silence. By chapter 3, Job did not curse God, but he did curse his own life. One translator has it, "I wish the day I was born had been annulled." His friends who could sit with him in the moments of silence, though, didn't have patience for that kind of talk. Now, Scripture doesn't tell us exactly what happened between the end of Job's lamentation in Job 3 and when the friends begin to speak at the beginning of Job 4. Maybe Job's unnamed pain was bearable for these companions, but the moment he spoke, it threatened for them a neatly ordered world. They had to speak up. This was a way of putting some order back onto things. Or maybe Job's suffering triggered some fear or concern in them, and hearing it was just too weighty upon them. Maybe Job's lament challenged their ideas about God. Could it be that their neatly constructed theologies weren't big enough containers to hold Job's experience of such senseless pain? Or maybe they just didn't talk about that kind of thing in their house. Maybe they were from a generation that kept those kinds of things quiet. Glad we don't have anybody here in that place. As you may know, a good deal of the rest of that ancient poetic book consists of these friends trying to make sense of Job's suffering. We heard the passage that Bruce shared for us from his buddy Bildad when he tries to make sense of Job's suffering. He says something to this effect: "Surely this is the justice of God. Your children must have sinned. That's why everything has fallen apart for you. Therefore, God demanded their lives and took all this from you and caused the suffering in your body too. If you, Job," Bildad continued, "will just make things right with God, good things will come your way and it will all be fine after this." Who needs enemies if you've got friends as good as Bildad? It's interesting. Before the friends said a word, they were there with Job. But the moment that they spoke up and sought to correct Job, they were no longer with, they were then against Job. And just like before they made the journey there, Job was left alone in the midst of his suffering. I wonder how many of us have been in a similar situation, particularly the situation of those friends. The weight of caring for another can become too heavy for us to bear. And maybe we go from being with one another to a posture of being against someone who threatens something in us. And please don't hear me wrongly. We need to be wise. There are times we need to find someone else to accompany someone who's suffering. And there may be times when the weight is too heavy and we need to disengage. But we never need to be against anyone who suffers. As true as that is in the midst of physical suffering, how much more so when someone experiences a mental health crisis? Those moments when the world no longer makes sense and there's no one to talk to. There's no way to talk oneself out of the pain. Sometimes, as caregivers, we need to maintain our silent presence, to lovingly listen. Today, we've got an opportunity to practice that very thing. Many of you will know Heidi DeJong. Her family has been here for decades. She serves as our staff parish relations committee chair. She was even on our staff at one time in the past. She offered, and I greatly accepted, an opportunity for us to hear some of her story and some hard-earned wisdom. As I said at the beginning of our time today, I invite you to lean in. This is a holy moment. We want to hold this time and our beloved sister gently and lovingly. Also, as Heidi shares with us, she's going to touch on some of the hard parts of her story, including depression. If this is not the right time for you to hear a story like this, we understand. I encourage you to simply step out, but don't step away. Find a pastor or a trusted friend, someone who can accompany you through your journey. With that being said, Heidi, would you come?
Good morning. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Heidi DeJong. And as Jonathan said, we've been part of this congregation off and on since the late 90s. When I was a kid, I used to come and visit with my aunt and uncle. We sat over there in front of the bells, and Denny Frary was the usher who was a weatherman. And I thought, oh, wow, this church has bells and a famous TV star here. So when we moved here, we started coming to St. Paul's, and it has been one of the greatest joys of my life. And as I hope to portray to you, it's been one of the best supports of my life in down times as well. So, because I only have a small allotted amount of time today, and as you know, if you've seen me talk before, I'm an emotional person, even on the best of days, and my hands will shake and I'll probably cry. So bear with me. And can we just say a quick prayer? Oh, great and loving God, I praise you for this opportunity to share. I wholeheartedly believe that while you did not inflict me with the things that I've been inflicted with, I do believe that you are going to work through me today. And please, if anyone listening, if you can just help work through them as well and know that you are there. It's in your Son's name that I pray this, amen. So because I only have a small allotted amount of time, I can't really delve into deeply what transpired in my life, which was in about the mid-2000s, I would say, was when it started. But I'm here to talk about mental illness, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think it's important to let you know that in many cases, and in my case, my mental unwellness, if you will, was caused by a combination of factors. I have a mental illness officially diagnosed as treatment-resistant or refractory major depressive disorder, among a handful of other diagnoses through the years. I don't wear this badge proudly, nor do I consider my illness shameful or embarrassing, and I have worked literally years to be accepting of this, because it's an illness like many illnesses. It's something that happened to me. Yes, some of the things might have been lifestyle causes, but also it's an illness, and I did not choose this. I did not choose this simply by choosing not to be happy, for example. I want to help dispel the misconception that all mental illness is either someone simply being weak, or also the other extreme being crazy or psychotic, although those are very real things, where a person's brain disallows them from being able to distinguish reality. Those are real things. That's not my situation. My mental health struggle happens to be clinical depression. Not all sadness is depression, and not all depression is simply sadness. It's a fact that everyone gets down from time to time. It's also a fact that there is a spectrum of almost all mental wellness and unwellness. And the truth is, you may have difficulty ascertaining if a person, where a person falls on that spectrum. My illness for a period of years was very severe. Today, I've reached a level of wellness that I'm largely maintaining, although it will always be a slippery slope. And I guard my mental health like I guard my children's lives. When I think back on the darkest years, it often feels like somebody else's life. A lot of you here today have walked with me through this. Some of you probably had no idea that this was something I struggled with. So I'm going to give you a very short version, and yes, this is the short version, although it might seem long, of what happened. It begins with a sort of perfect storm of life events that started the unraveling, as I sometimes call it. In a relatively short period of time, my mom was killed in a tragic freak incident. We moved multiple times and endured damage from 4 different hurricanes to 2 different homes, 2 of which caused catastrophic damage and huge financial stress. We also had 2 basement floods in 2 different homes, which destroyed years and years of memories in an instant. After my mom's death, my family of origin, in which I'd been lovingly raised, struggled mightily, which sometimes happens even in the best of families. And I, being the only girl, felt responsible to hold us together. I could not. My dad had multiple medical issues at that time, including strokes and pulmonary embolism, and it felt like was near death most of the time. Deciding on his care weighed heavily on me, and added to this, there were major struggles with his finances and my siblings, and again, not wanting to sugarcoat, but also not airing all our dirty laundry, we had some what you might call made-for-TV movie types of things go down in our family, like theft among siblings and legal action. Not pretty. I was adopted, but have known my biological mother since I was about 18, and unfortunately, this was also about the time she chose to let me know that she, who's never raised a child, didn't approve of my parenting because my kids were too polite. Not kidding, that was what she said. Sadly, she, someone with addiction and mental health issues of her own, was not a very safe person for me with my waning mental stability. My biological father had committed suicide at age 29, so I never met him. So you see, despite having been raised by wonderful, mostly mentally well parents, the genetic deck was stacked against me. The icing on the proverbial cake was that I had a multitude of physical issues in a relatively short amount of time, requiring different surgeries, many different surgeries, including one which I now understand contributed greatly to the hormonal and chemical upset, which helped drive my depression. Anyway, I've only hit the big points here, but I'm sharing this all with you to demonstrate that my journey into mental illness was most likely caused by a combination of many factors, which is often the case. A therapist once told me that it was a miracle I wasn't a crack addict in the gutter somewhere, based on the messy combo of genetic, biological, and situational causes going on for me. Whatever the cause or causes, the effect can be described in perhaps much more simple terms. I developed a mental illness to which I very nearly lost my physical life, and very much did lose my life in other ways, including spiritually at points along the way. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Pastors Ryan and Jonathan have been talking the past few weeks about mental illness, our faith, and our call as a loving Christian community to come alongside those who suffer. It's no secret to anyone, I think, that mental illness presents unique challenges, or at least it feels like it does, to those wanting to care for those who suffer. Why is this? I think it's getting better, I really do, gradually, I would say, but mental illness just makes people uncomfortable, let's be honest. It's often felt to be a private illness, and there's much shame associated with it, as if people suffering are weak or flawed or bad or simply unable to manage things like non-crazy normal people. I once read a long time ago, and I've seen many times since, that mental illness is not a casserole illness. Has anybody heard that before? I'll tell you what that means. The first I heard of this was in a TED Talk by someone whose child was mentally ill and struggled deeply. Help was scarce, support was scarce, lots of judgment, very few answers. Then this same TED Talker herself was diagnosed with breast cancer. Meal trains came, fundraising, support, clear medical advice. It all ensued, which should happen, but it was the opposite of what her son's illness had involved. Casseroles arrived. There's much talk about stigma surrounding mental illness, and this is a very, very real thing, and it's a very dangerous thing. It's often the part that keeps people from seeking help. What people are going to think. Another very real and dangerous thing is that mental health care, including insurance covering, even today, often ranges from not great to abysmal. And the cost in terms of pure dollars and cents can be overwhelming. It certainly was for us. At the time of my sickest time, Sean, my husband, worked for a hospital, yet our mental health care insurance was woefully lacking. The more money we threw at my problem, the deeper my despair. I was using resources that were taking away from my children and my husband. One of the questions I'm often asked is, so what did you do to get better? Because obviously I'm better now than I was then, as in terms of mental wellness. A better question might be, what didn't I do? I could not count, I literally could not even guess at the dozens, probably hundreds of different types of medications and or combinations of medicines I tried over time. Different providers, different therapy, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I spent time at 2 different points out of state at alternative health places for weeks. I was desperate to be well again, and desperate is not hyperbole. Off meds and on supplements, lifestyle changes, off supplements, back on meds, new meds, meds that made me sick, meds that had horrible side effects, meds that made me manic, meds that would work for a period of time and then not, back to the drawing board. And I was trying to raise a family throughout this, all the while trying to maintain some level of normalcy for them. Put on my mask, show up for them in what way I could possibly show up. Meanwhile, I was hospitalized on the psych floor of multiple hospitals, a total of 8 times. Some of those experiences were very helpful, others were terrifying and not remotely helpful, and in some ways actually harmful. Hopelessness was an aspect of my illness from the get-go, but after years of battle with this invisible enemy, the level of hopelessness was indescribable. Ultimately, I chose to have ECT, which for those of you who don't know is shock treatment, electric shock treatment. If I tell you that I have always had a phobic fear, literally a phobic level of fear of electricity even since childhood, you will know how desperate I was to even consider this option. It helped, although it did not cure. I lost parts of my memory as a result. I gained many, many pounds from many medications. At some points, I shook uncontrollably due to meds. I was required to sign a release at the Mayo Clinic that I was aware that one of my meds would possibly cause diabetes. I signed it, and it did. Again, to the limitations of time, the short version of what I most wish to accomplish with this little personal TED Talk this morning is to hopefully help humanize and put a familiar face on severe mental illness. It's not always what you think it is. To provide hope to those who might be struggling, that there can be light on the other side of darkness, even when it feels like it cannot possibly be true. I promise you that's how I felt. I'm proof that it can, but also I wish to answer this question to the best of my ability. What do we do if we want to help someone who's struggling with mental illness as part of the body of Christ? So I can share with you a little bit of what helped me and some of the things that didn't. First and foremost, number one, I just ask you don't judge. I'm not simply talking about not judging people who are mentally ill, because in fact, you probably have no idea someone sitting right next to you may be mentally unwell. I'm saying please just stop assuming that every human experiences life as you do. I'll be honest, before my mental health took a nosedive, I probably fell in the judgy category more often than I would like to admit. If people seem flaky or don't get involved in church or at a level you think they should or fall short of your expectations on what you think a church member or a Christian should be or do, I just caution you. Yeah, it sounds like a cliche or a meme on social media, but it is so valid. Be kind always. We have no idea what a person's going through, what they're capable of, what's in their heart, what's in their soul, what's in their life at any given moment. A person may be putting on their very bravest face to try to exude wellness and normalcy for the sake of their children. That's my story. For example, they may seem perfectly fine to you, and then they may go home and take to the bed or cry for hours on end and consider all the ways that their very existence is harming the people they love the most. Number two, just love them. Jonathan and Ryan have been very good to point this out. Just walk alongside them, love them where they are. Love them and let them know, like the love of God, that they do not need to perform or be perfect or toe some imaginary Christian line for them to be accepted and welcomed in this holy place or anywhere in the world. Jonathan said last week in a reflection on what Ryan had shared, God loves you. God has given you everything you need. There is no need to perform or be anything other than what you are, who you are. These words are exactly what I had trouble believing when I was unwell, but boy, did I need to hear them. And I still do. Don't we all? The best way people loved me through my illness was just to let me know I was valuable no matter what, because I could not find any value in myself, and that they were in it with me. We live in a society that values production and consistency. We go to church that values service. These are inherently good things. I'm not saying they're not good, but at St. Paul's and many other United Methodist churches and many other Christian denominations, there's a focus on being the hands of God and serving. Again, these are good things. It's one of the reasons I've been a United Methodist my whole life. I believe fully that this is what the Jesus of the gospel compels us to do, to help, to serve. This is where I would simply urge you to remember that there are seasons in all of our lives. When the seasons of my life changed, and I went from being an active participating member of this congregation to really just barely staying alive and rarely attending with relatively few exceptions, I experienced love and acceptance and support here, and even when I wasn't here. There are so many examples of this, and I can't name everyone. A lot of you are here today supporting me, and I appreciate it so much. Members of my adult Sunday school class that we haven't met as a class for years, but have been so supportive of me and my family for so much time. I have, to this day, in my kitchen cupboard, a part of a printed Bible verse from 1 Corinthians 12:26 that says, if one member suffers, all suffer together with it. Bryce Anton Jensen gave me this, just a sheet of paper, and then a note on the top said, something to remember when feeling low. I remember at the time Nancy said, I can't believe that he did that. That's just not like Bryce. And so it was meaningful. Not that Bryce isn't heartfelt, but that he shared that with me. And speaking of Nancy, she was someone who reached out to me regularly by phone, and I'm not kidding you, I rarely answered, but she kept calling. When I would show up and worship very erratically and regularly as I once had, and not regularly as I once had, Brad Hart, when ushering, would give me a hug and warmly welcome me in a way in which I knew he really meant it when he said I was missed. That may seem like a small thing, but to me that was like everything. He maybe didn't even know what was going on with me, but this mattered so much to me. One day, my friend Andrea, who I met here at St. Paul's, came to my house when I was at one of my lowest points. I probably hadn't bathed, to be honest, in days. And she helped me get in the bathtub. She sat with me, she just was present, no judgment, no advice, just love. Number 3, know that for people like myself, and this is really important, and I hope you hear this, I once had a very deep and meaningful spiritual life prior to my mental unwellness. But for me, when coming to worship, hearing the music, and even scripture that once felt beautiful and comforting and calming, often felt excruciating. What once brought peace now caused questioning. For some, this won't make sense, because isn't faith supposed to be about trusting God and leaning on the everlasting arms and all of that? Well, I urge you to remember, mental illness is a disease of the mind, of the brain. It doesn't work right. Thoughts don't work right. I always say to anyone who will listen, depression, lies. I thought things like, where is God? Where is God in all of this? Why are my prayers unanswered? Why isn't my faith strong enough to endure this? Why don't you hear me, God? Just last week, the choir sang a piece with the prayer of St. Francis, which, by the way, I love so much that I have it on a plaque on my nightstand. And the men's ensemble sang, "How Can I Keep From Singing?" which is an anthem that I know and love and have sung before. But have you ever thought about songs and hymns like this from the perspective of a deeply clinically depressed person? Make me an instrument of your peace, beautiful, perfect. But in darkness, when depression was running the show in my mind, my thoughts would absolutely have been, I know this is what I'm called to do and to be, but I can't even take care of myself and people that I love, let alone care for other people. I can't help others find peace when I have no peace. I got nothing. I'm a cruddy Christian. There is even a line that says we should seek to console rather than be consoled. Oh my, the guilt that things like this contributed to my sick, sick mind. And how can I keep from singing? Seriously? This song is meant to be uplifting, and it is uplifting, and basically just talks about how awesome it is to have Christ to cling to, even in the depths of bad things that life throws our way. So if you absolutely do not feel, cannot feel like singing, even when storms can and do in fact rock one's inmost calm, as the song says, just like everything else in my world, when depression told me its ugly lies, this provided proof to me of my failures at everything. I can't even do God right. And finally, number 4, please know that it really is okay, as Jonathan talked about earlier, to not try to fix things, to fix people. I want to gently, lovingly add that to a very ill person, it will likely not be helpful to say things like, everybody struggles, everybody gets down sometimes, look on the sunny side. If you don't think this happened, I promise you multiple examples of this throughout my struggles. Have an attitude of gratitude. It'll all turn around. I've been sick. I've been depressed. I have this person in my life that's been depressed. They did this and so on. My sister's boyfriend's mom just ate keto, and that was all it took to cure her depression. And so on. So generally speaking, folks who offer advice and help to hurting folks are truly trying to help. I really do get that. So I'm not trying to be mean. And if someone is teetering on the edge of unwellness in a mood disorder type of situation, just kind of on the edge there, perhaps reminding them of self-care might be indeed helpful. But hear me out here. As I started saying in the beginning, we do not always know where someone is truly on the wellness spectrum. So it's okay to just love them. It's okay to not give them advice. I guess that's my advice. Or take them a casserole, right? Check in with them. Tell them you miss them when you see them and mean it. When you're in a class, like when we did Stephen Ministry, and people would ask me about my depression struggles and listen and not judge. All good things. As a caveat to all I've just said, I would implore you, though, if you sense that someone is on the very dark end of that mental wellness spectrum and there might be danger in terms of self-harm, do not think twice about seeking professional help. In closing, I will tell you that after having read and read and read and written and written and written and talked and talked and talked about my journey with clinical depression, not just here, but also having chosen work where I worked on a psych floor in one of the places where I was once a patient, and having led groups and discussed freely one-on-one with hurting individuals, what I have come to believe unequivocally through all of this is threefold. Number one, healing and wellness is a journey very unique to every individual. What works for some won't work for others. What might take someone 4 weeks of healing might take someone else 4 years or longer. If you hear me right now and you are hurting, please hold on and have hope. Keep fighting. It can and does get better, even if it feels like this will never happen. Helping or working, this is number two, helping or walking alongside someone with mental illness can be heart-wrenching, all-encompassing, frustrating. I've watched this with my own family. Caregivers like my amazing husband and ridiculous patient, supportive loved ones, family, friends also need care. If you find yourself in this holy space of caring for a supportive and supporting a loved one, give yourself grace and don't be ashamed or afraid to ask for prayers and support for yourself as well. If someone's illness is too big for you to handle, there is also no shame in getting that person help and safety. And number three, finally, for me, the most important and meaningful analogy has been and will always be that of God being the sun, and that the sun is always there, although at times it's obscured by clouds. Even sometimes for long, long, long periods of time, to the point where it feels like there is not, in fact, a sun. It does not feel like there is God. Well, I'm here. I'm here and I'm okay right now. I got better. It took a long time. But there is hope. The clouds cleared. They may come back again, and they have from time to time. But it happened. The clouds went away, and I have joy and life and can feel and know God again today. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but this is enough for today. To anyone who is struggling or suffering and might not be able to hear or believe this right now, I want to offer you hope in that I was once where you are and struggled to believe that the sun is always there. I promise you, God is always there and loves you and holds you even when you can't feel it, believe it, or know it.